Our guest today on Under Oath is baseball player and writer Art Shamsky. Art, can you hear me?
I can. I can. Sound good.
The title of the book, somebody was bringing this up to me yesterday when we were going through everything. We're doing a little Mets stories I only tell my friends, but it's a book.
Well, what's interesting. This is my third book. I've written two others, and most of them all of them been about the 1969 Mets and my career as a baseball player. And I was trying to figure out, what am I going to write about? I'm never going to be a novelist writing love stories or things of that nature. But the thing about it is, I wanted to write a little bit different kind of book about 1969 and my career. And I actually happened to see some excerpts from a book that former President Dwight Eisenhower wrote many years ago, called At Ease, stories I only tell my friends. And I thought about it. I said, well, maybe I can expand on some of the things that have been written before about the team and about my life. And really, that's how it all came about. And I realized that 1969 Met team, it has more books written about it than any other sports team in history of sports. I really believe that. And so I had to do something different. And it really is about my relationships with some teammates and things that I did on and off the field, how I got traded over to the Mets, which is a story in itself. And so for me, it was just a way to do something a little bit different than write about how I wrote about before.
Now, professional athletes are a little different than lawyers and doctors. Normally, if you're a lawyer, you work in the same place. You're a doctor, you work in the same place. But as a baseball player or other professional athletes, you could move in like a minute. In baseball specifically that way, where you could get traded, you could be playing another game in another city that night.
Well, it's true. That's what happened to me towards the end of my career. I was, really kind of banged up. I got hurt. In the last couple of years I played, I was either on a disabled list or not really healthy enough to play. And when I gave up the game at a very young age, I realized that I just needed to stay healthier, and I would have been in the game a lot longer. But that's part of it. Guys get traded. We all have been, most people have been traded once or twice in their career. Very unusual for somebody not to. So, but that was a story for me at the end of my career, where I got traded from the Mets to the St. Louis, to ended up with the Cubs for a while, and then ended up with Oakland the first year they won the World Series, which was great. But at a very young age, I said, I just don't want to go through this again, and realized 2 years later or so that I should have tried to hang on, because salaries got escalated, the pension plan was more in effect, and all sorts of things happened, like free agency and arbitration. But those are things you think about years later and wish you would have done differently. But I have got no complaints. I've had a pretty good life.
Now, back then, they didn't really, you played hurt. There were no options. You said, listen, you got to play. We need you. I mean, do you think your career would have been much longer if it would have existed 10 years later?
Yes, I think players today are treated much better. Medical things are much better. Diet is much better. Training is better. They're bigger and stronger. That's a separate issue than if I do think they play the game any better than when I played back in the 60s and 70s. But the reality of it is, you play today, you've got extra special care and doctors right there, and you get hurt, somebody's right on top of it to make sure that you're getting the best medical care that you can get. And that just wasn't the case, especially before me, back in the 40s, 50s, and early 60s. And when I came up to the big leagues, you had a doctor that maybe come once a homestand, and that was it. And then the trainer really kind of took care of you. Now it's a whole different world.
Now, I used to be a sports agent, and everything was based on statistics, but the one thing you couldn't weigh in is heart. And I noticed there's been huge changes in that because there's entitlement issues, the money. I mean, do you think there's the same amount of heart in these games than that it used to be?
That I'd hate to think a player doesn't play hard all the time, but I will tell you this: I think managers today, in particular in baseball, managed by sabermetrics, they think they get printouts from the front office and who's going to play, when they're going to pinch hit, when they're going to do this, or not pinch hit, but change pitchers, etc. In my era, I think guys I played for, in particular, my manager with the Mets. I just think they manage differently, and I think that they manage by heart, they manage by feel. Whereas today, everything is a printout. It's really, you got guys, college graduates making decisions that you can't measure unless you're out on the field, and that's the difference in the game tonight and today. I think it's just a different world in that respect. We could argue all day, is the game better now than it was? I think we need another program for that, because I have my own opinion about it. But I was very lucky when I played in the '60s. I think it was the greatest conglomerate of players in the history of the game. I played the National League with Mays, Aaron, Clemente, Stargell, McCovey, Frank Robinson, Pete Rose, Johnny Bench, Tony Perez, Billy Williams. I mean, the list goes on and on. Koufax, Drysdale, Marichal, Gibson, Seaver, Kuzman, who did I say? Carlton, Jim Bunning. I mean, just guys that all of them, for the most part, in the Hall of Fame. I think the game was different back then. It was I don't know. I need another program to talk about all those feelings about it. But it's still a wonderful game. Baseball is the greatest game in the world. It teaches you humility. It teaches you how to deal with adversity. What other game can you fail 7 out of 10 times and still be a star? And it teaches you how to overcome some of that stuff. And if you don't overcome it, you're out. They weed you out. But that's what I tell kids, and I work with them, and I do some clinics. Baseball is still the greatest game in the world.
Now, the Hall of Fame, what I hate about the Hall of Fame is that athletes don't make the determination who gets in, but mainly sports writers, people who didn't play the game, people who didn't have to suffer. And I always hear writers talk about who should get in, who shouldn't, and who's forgiven, who's not. And I know Pete Rose and Joe Jackson have just been basically forgiven by Major League Baseball. As a player, your opinion on something like that, to say, listen, we're flawed individuals, but do we have forgiveness for certain things?
Well, I've never been one to really like the way the players are voted into writers in the Hall of Fame. And in Pete Rose's case, we were best of friends at one time. We started our careers with Cincinnati together, played in the minor leagues together. And I'm just saddened by the fact that they did it after he passed away. Who knows if he'll get in, because it's a strange system that they have. And I think he'd have to go through a committee. He wouldn't be voted in by any writers because he's been out so long. And these committees are made up of 16 individuals, not all ball players, but could be a writer or two or a front office person. So who knows if he's going to get in. I just think the fact that they did it after he passed away, to me, it should have been done in a different way. And maybe I'm partial because we were good friends, but the reality of it is, and I've never been crazy about the Hall of Fame, the way it did, even up to this point where some guys got in through certain aspects, through certain committees, and it's very subjective, and I understand that, but I always thought the Hall of Fame was really for special people, would put up special numbers, special skills. And it's kind of segued to my mind out of that. And in some ways, it's who you know and things of that nature. But again, that's another program at another time, I think.
I remember in Vegas, I was in Vegas about 10 years ago, and I found out that Pete signed in Vegas. He basically lived there. And I remember going to the MGM and sitting with him for like 2 minutes, and he was sitting at an empty table signing balls. And I was thinking to myself, this is one of the best players who ever existed. And for Major League Baseball to do this, for any group to do this to him and not be forgiving and understanding, it just was heartbreaking.
Well, what's interesting about Pete, if you look at his records, unbelievable records in the National League, switch hitting records, all-star game. I think he went in as an all-star in 4 different positions. What's interesting about that situation with Pete, 20 years ago when I go out and talk, and I do a lot of personal appearances, a lot of people didn't want him to be in for various reasons. They thought his off-field things, the gambling, was too much of something to overcome. But over the years, that needle was going the other way, and more people now wish he would have got in than ever before. And what's interesting about the ones who still don't want him to be in, that small percentage of people who don't think he should be in their minds for very good reasons, I would say 99 and 9/10% of them wish everybody played the game like Pete did. And that's a sadness I feel in that situation, because he was such a dominant, hard-nosed player, and people respected that, and people loved him for that, and that was his trademark. And I think, looking at his career and the things he accomplished in all those years he played in all the different positions as an all-star, I think at some point you look at and you say, hey, what he did was not right. We understand that, but there's so much going on now, with all the gambling, and now they're promoting it and everything else. So, it is what it is. But I hope that he gets in at some point.
Now, more on the line of a personal question. I was in the Army. I did a lot of things, and I don't I don't wear my religion on my sleeve, and being Jewish in a community that's not Jewish, or an organization that's not Jewish, you try to, how can I say it? Stay in your lane. Don't stick out. Don't do anything, because you don't want to be attacked for it. Now, you were a baseball player in the 60s and 70s. I mean, how did this really affect you, or was it something that you said, yeah, I have no problem with, I want to be out there?
It never really affected me. For whatever reason, I think an era before me, or maybe in the 40s, even 30s, 40s, maybe early 50s, guys were affected. Maybe they heard things. I never had a problem. I had good teammates, people that respected me as a person and as a player, and so I can honestly say I never had any teammates. I've had many questions about that, but I can honestly tell you that in my experience, it was just as a ball player. I like to think that people looked at me as a ball player. I did manage a team in Israel when they started a league in 2007. And I really enjoyed being over there. I think those of us who went there, unfortunately, the league only lasted 1 year, but it was a prelude to Israel determining that they wanted to be a factor in international baseball. And subsequent to that, the fields were awful, the equipment was bad, the players were not very good. But I always feel like at some point that when people talk to me about it, that those of us who went there and started that league were kind of the catalyst in Israel determining they want to be a player in international baseball. And so they decided to build some fields and develop the game. And as witnessed by the last couple World Baseball Classics and the Olympics, they've done really well, and to their credit. But I enjoyed that a lot, and for me to be part of that and tell people that I was instrumental in them developing the game, I think is very, very important to me. But on a personal level, I've never really had any players. I looked at myself as a big league player or a baseball player, and that's what it was. And so for me, it was just being who I was.
Now, you had mentioned in a couple other interviews about your, growing up in a family where, success was being a doctor or a lawyer and everything else like that. When you tell your parents, you go, hey, listen, I think my calling is baseball. What did they say to you?
Well, my dad was the first person that I dedicated this last book, Met Stories. I only told my friends to my dad, who was the first person to soft toss with me and brought me a glove, and he was really the person instrumental in me developing as a baseball player. My mom, she couldn't have cared less. She I probably can count on one hand the number of games she came to is that when I was playing amateur baseball. When I got to the big leagues, they came much more than they did before. But I don't think it mattered to them. My dad was a big St. Louis Cardinal fan. We grew up in St. Louis, and I think he was happy that I made a career in baseball.
Your book is called Met Stories I Only Tell My Friends. I assume we can get that through Amazon, Kindle, and everything else?
You can get it to Amazon. Anybody can get it to Amazon or Triumph Books or any really good bookstore. And they can also get it from me on my website, artshamsky.com, where they would get one that's autographed. I can guarantee they get one that's autographed if they go through my website. But it's doing really well in the bookstores, and I would say wherever they can get it, to get it, because it's a great book.
Well, I appreciate talking to you, Art. I look forward to talking to you again.
All right. Thanks so much. I appreciate it.